All right, let's talk about some of those problems with the ocean, some water pollution out there. So, first of all, the ocean is huge, as you well know, and as a result, if you don't overload it, it can handle a really large quantity of degradable pollutants. So it's capable of handling quite a bit degradable pollution kind of stuff. Okay, because there's lots of water there, it has the ability to dilute, disperse, and degrade those pollutants, which is pretty cool. However, pollution on coastal waters, which is a problem because their heavily populated area, is now becoming a really serious problem. It's not being spread out, it's not being dispersed, it's not being diluted the way it should. About 40% of the world's population lives on a coast. And it's estimated that 80% of all the pollution out there originated on land. And so you can see how if the vast majority of the population is living on the coast and a lot of the pollution is coming from the land, that pollution is being concentrated in those areas, and that's creating a problem. Now, what are some of the problems? Here's one problem. Harmful algae plumes, known as HABs. They're caused by a really heavy growth of algae. So you can see this weird little line here in this picture and this reddish stuff here. That's algae that's grown in huge quantities. And it usually does that because of two things. Either sewage is being dumped there and it's eating the sewage and growing rapidly, or you have agricultural runoff that is adding a lot of nutrients to the soil. In both cases, the oxygen in those areas is being depleted rapidly because the algae is using it to consume and eat and grow. And so it creates what they call hypoxia, an environment that has very low levels of oxygen. Now, over time, you can actually create enough hypoxia that you move into anoxic environments where there's no oxygen whatsoever. This hypoxic environment is sometimes referred to as a dead zone. Now, that's a little bit of a misnomer. It's not really a dead zone because there are things living there. There are decomposers still present. So it's not really truly a dead zone, but it doesn't have any of the regular fish and things that you would see normally in those environments. So this is one problem with pollution. Now, where does this pollution, these different kinds of pollution come from? Well, urban sprawl is creating its level of pollution. You have construction. You have farmlands. Here's a picture of those red tide pictures I was showing you earlier. Here's the oxygen depleted zone where there's extra fertilizer and stuff being put out there. You can have sludge that's running off underneath from industry and stuff like that. It builds up on the bottom and creates toxic sediments on the bottom that interact with creatures near the bottom. Generally, cities produce a lot of it. And then when you get out into the open ocean where there's actually potentially healthy zones at work, we're fishing those like crazy. And so there's really some issues with health, especially along the coasts as it pertains to pollution. Here's one particular focused look at that. Did you know that we have these little algae plumes and these anoxic or hypoxic environments in our Gulf of Mexico on a regular basis? It actually happens seasonally, every spring and summer. As we get runoff into the Gulf of Mexico, we have excess nutrients that have flowed down the Mississippi River. They get put out in there. Of course, the algae blow up. We get the low anoxic environments, which makes fish and crab and shrimp and all those things suffer immensely. And as a result, they die off during those times. And so here's an actual cycle of how that process works. And so this is a case where we are already seeing it year after year after year, creating problems for us, where we have a lot of fishing industry and stuff happening down there. So something that we need to be aware of and work to fix. And then ocean oil pollution is another problem, of course. We had the BP oil spill. There's a lot of issues with that. 37 to 50% of ocean oil production comes from human activities on land. So what happens is we actually do stuff on land and then it leaks, it spills, or is dumped and ends up running off from land into the water. So a large portion of what we think of oil spills at sea actually start on land. And then there are other huge oil spills that happen out in the ocean, usually from tanker accidents or well malfunctions or whatever it may be, and those really grab the headlines. So like the Exxon Valdez, which crashed into some rocks because I believe the captain was drunk maybe, back in 1989, and it spilled 11 million gallons of crude oil all the way through this area right here called the Prince William Sound, which is a pretty cool part of Alaska, and it was completely doused with oil through this whole region, and it created some real problems. And so it affects lots of creatures, but here are some of the major ones. Well, there's a major commercial fishing industry in Prince William Sound that was really decimated by this. In addition, shorebirds and waterfowl and sea otters and all those other species, porpoises and sea lions, whales, all of those things that lived, bred, interacted in those waters had these real big issues. And this is pictures of the oil as it washed up on shore being cleaned up, and you just see it's everywhere. And so we see these big ones make the headlines, and they are scary stuff. They create all kinds of problems, especially with animals with fur or birds that are diving. They'll dive through that oil and get coated, and they can't fly out of it. It can really devastate these populations. In addition, people are interacting with that. It's creating problems there as well. So these are the big ones that make the headlines, and they're devastating. But there's just as big a concern out there there isn't a concern, but there should be just as big a concern of oil running off from parking lots and on land that is eventually getting out there into the water. That's more of a silent killer, but a real problem nonetheless. And so what are some solutions? Well, again, this is a better handled as a prevention than it is as a cleanup thing. So how do we prevent coastal water pollution? Reduce the amount of input of toxic chemicals, of course. Separate sewage and storm drains. Ban dumping of waste out in coastal areas. Ban ocean dumping of sludge and hazardous waste. Regulate coastal development and oil drilling and oil shipping. Don't allow as much of that stuff to take place. And require double hauls on all tankers. 2 layers. In case they hit something, they won't break the inside layer with the oil inside of it. These are things that can help prevent. Cleaning up. Improve oil spill cleanup capacities. We don't have a lot out there, and we scramble every time a big one happens. Use those nanoparticles that haven't been developed yet. Require secondary treatment of coastal sewage. That is a possible way to clean it up. And then use wetlands and solar aquatic things to help clean up and treat after the fact. Again, these solutions, prevention, are far better than the cleanup things at hand. I mean, cleanup can be all the way down to as basic as people are taking rags and rubbing rocks off. And so we don't have any advanced ways to clean up some things. So prevention is the best way to handle that situation.